Right, welcome everyone. We're here joined by Zeal and Noble. How are you gentlemen doing?
All good.
All good down here. Wonderful to be with you too.
Likewise, man. So today
Likewise.
we're going to be discussing the idea of molybdenum, which, from what I've read, and Noble was quite generous in providing me a discussion that he had with an individual called Steffer, and she has quite a, or he has quite a great bit of insight into this. And ultimately, from what I could read regarding it, it effectively is a sort of evolved, a material evolution from graphene oxide, from what I'm reading. And ultimately, what it does is it's this sort of incremental replacement of silicon. And from what I could research regarding it, it is to ensure the mitigation of what's called electron tunneling at sub 2 nanometer circuitries. So it's basically a very significant development in the long march towards biodigital convergence, because it ensures, unlike silicon, that one can reduce in size that of the sort of behemothic data centers, and also expand data capture potential by potentially in the future saturating the entire landscape with this material. And it also states as well that a lot of the viruses and viral narratives are merely covers, guises, excuses, justifications, if you will, to hide the pollution of the mining and producing, and of course, introduction of this material into the environment. So would that be accurate, Noble, regarding what Steffer states ultimately?
Yeah. I think you did a fine job of summarizing, at least in part, where she's at. Yes, the it's a complicated subject. It's one of multiple facets in this labyrinth that we're all navigating together. But I think you did a fine job of summarizing it. It helps, at least in my mind, it helps bring to closure some open questions that I've had with regards to some of the goings on uh, of the last decade, really, and just some of the what I think we might collectively identify as psyops and whatnot, or just events that emerge that seem, on the face of it, is to be quite complexing, right? It's like um, this helps us to understand, or at least it does for me, help us understand maybe a one viable, um, well, narrative, if you will, for lack of a better, for what the hell is going on in this realm that we share and live in. So
Do you have comments upon that, Zeal? I'm going to get into a few bits of
Hey,
both reports and articles, but if you have any opening comments upon that.
well, I suppose that. Uh, hold on a second here. Get my head together. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So as Noble was saying, this is it's a complicated subject, and it's easy to get neck deep in it really quickly with the technology. However, my opening comment on this stuff is at the back of your head, one's head, myself included. I am keeping in mind the basic concept of a circuit, like an electrical circuit, or a circuit that's operating essentially on the electromagnetic spectrum. So that it might be, so we're talking about signals going from A to B and back again. And really, we're talking about from the human body to the tech and back. So really, like, wherever you go into kind of researching about this stuff and reading about this stuff, you kind of have to come back to this concept of a circuit. And like the rub is, like, in a traditional circuit, we tend to think of like copper wires, joining A to B or whatever. But in this type of circuitry, there are no wires, right? That might sound a bit stupid, but it's kind of important from a thought experiment kind of point of view to keep that in mind. So we're talking about stuff that's transferring over the electromagnetic spectrum. For example, it might be light based through the, what we call light, and in terms of light, it might be, for example, in the infrared part of the spectrum, or it might be in further up the electromagnetic spectrum into what we might call near to microwaves, but which would actually be in the terahertz band. So let's go back again. We're talking about a circuit, right? What is that's just as a basic overview, thought experiment stuff. And like another a thought experiment might be, for example, when I went into work the other day, they still have the old school COVID thermometer, and you just walk past it, and I'm like 8 foot away from this gadget, and it can read my body temperature. I'm not near it. So it's even to get your head around the basic tech at this point in time. Forget about where we're going into with some of this stuff, but even the basic technology and I put this comment at myself, is to get back to basics with what is the electromagnetic spectrum? What does that mean? What are we talking about here? We're talking about electromagnetism. We're talking about frequencies. We're talking about frequencies that can occur in terms of what we might call light, but they also might be electromagnetic in nature. So these kinds of things are important to keep in the back of your head. Well, for me anyway, when you're venturing forth into this stuff. And like very quickly, I'll just, Silas, that's just I can keep going, or if you want to stop me, or
oh, please finish your point. Keep going.
Okay, so just on this topic of molybdenum, right? Molybdenum disulfide. Am I right? It's MOS2. Am I right with the
molybdenum disulfide? Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure am I wrong or are you right? Is it molybdenum or molybdenum? Which is it? I'm not sure.
Maybe it is molybdenum. Yeah.
Well, whichever one it is, it's MO anyway, is the chemical.
Yeah, that's the chemical signature. You're right there. Yeah.
Exactly, on the periodic table. So, like a lot of this stuff for me, anyway, I haven't, like, the last time I came across even the basics on this stuff was high school, which is a long time ago. Physics and chemistry and just very basic kind of elementary stuff. So it's one angle, or maybe the angle, or one angle anyway, on this biodigital thing is that the human body it issues out photonic light, photons, right? And it issues these kind of signals on the electromagnetic spectrum, as far as I know, as part of its natural, cellular and DNA and protein goings on a daily basis. All of these things have a sort of electromagnetic signature. Anything that happens in a cell, for example, or even within your DNA, we're hearing theories that this stuff is, is coded between DNA and mRNA, is essentially electric code, and or your nervous system, etc., etc. So all of this kind of has an electric or electromagnetic sort of a field around it, or a basis to it, or some sort of a system. So if you think of it in very simple terms, if you tell your hand to reach out and grab the cup of tea or coffee, your hand will move out to get the cup, because your brain, assuming everything works okay, your brain has sent a signal to the muscles in your hand to reach out and grab that cup. So that's electric. It's through the nervous system. There's an electric impulse. So that's send. You sent a signal from your brain to your hand and your arm to move out and grab the cup. At the same time, if the cup is too hot, your fingertips might feel heat, or you might get burned. And in that sense, it's a receive. There's a receive function as well. in this nervous system. So it's send and receive. So when I was looking into this kind of stuff, I came up with this this concept of a photomultiplier. Now, a photomultiplier is that which is capable of reading these photonic electric signals that may issue, we'll say, for example, from the human body. So it's called a photomultiplier. So that very basically means in the term, it's reading this photonic light and it's multiplying, it's amplifying it. Now, why does it have to amplify it? Because these photonic signatures and emissions that are coming from the body and are involved in the body are what they call ultra weak. They're ultra weak. They're very, very, very sort of low energy signals that are very, very difficult to detect. You can't see them. It's very difficult to even to measure them, but they are present. So what's at the center of all this biodigital thing is the interface with these ultra weak signals. And that's where we get into the kind of more boggy stuff, right? We can get very quickly. But there's various types of these photomultipliers, right? Now, what I asked our good friend, Mr. AI, right, to do me a list, which I have in front of me here, of photomultipliers. But I thought to ask it at the nanoscale. And when I say nanoscale, I'm talking about in and around the atomic scale, which is, a millionth the width of a human hair is what we're talking about, right? So it spat out a list for me of nanoscale photomultipliers. And I'll just quickly go through a couple of them. We have silicon photomultipliers. We have avalanche photodiodes, which I can go into some of these. They use high electric fields to generate current multiplication through avalanche breakdown. Nanoscale engineering improves efficiency and reduces noise. Noise is an issue here in this environment quite a bit. Noise also comes in radio signals. Go ahead.
No, absolutely, yeah. No, I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Yeah. So a couple more micro-channel plate photomultipliers, nanowire multipliers, which is we need a little bit more on that. What are nanowires? But nanowire photomultipliers. Then we have quantum dot photomultipliers, right? And then we have graphene and 2D material photomultipliers. Now, what does 2D mean? Well, as far as I know, 2D means two-dimensional. What a 2D material is, it's a material that is one atom thick. And this is central to the new technology, is this concept of a new type of semiconductor, right? Which is made from 2D material, a semiconductor that is literally one atom thick. So you're on the nanoscale. You're computing in the nanoscale, right?
And also as well, that this photomultiplier idea relates to almost ensuring that the physical environment becomes integratable with the digital technologies themselves. And moreover too, when it gets down to the one atom thick, the physical environment and the biodigital environment become almost imperceptible in terms of the distinguishing between the two,
Yeah. And just very quickly on this particular one, graphene and 2D material photomultipliers. One of the 2D. That's why graphene is important, because graphene is a 2D material. You can make a semiconductor that's one atom thick using graphene and some other materials, right? One of the other materials you can use outside graphene is MOS2, molybdenum or molybdenum disulfide. So that is where the molybdenum stuff is coming in. So the advantages of it, it's offering super fast response, broadband sensitivity, extreme thinness, and they are used in hybrid structures for improved performance. So that's one potential why the molybdenum is coming in, molybdenum disulfide in those nanoscale photomultipliers. There was something else I just wanted to mention briefly. It'll come to me again. So there's a couple more of them. There's a plasmonic They use a plasmonic photomultiplier, superconducting nanowire detectors, a nano vacuum, and field emission devices. Right. Right. These photomultipliers are, quote, critical for applications in imaging, sensing, quantum communication, and emerging biodigital systems. So,
and
go
also
ahead.
as well regarding the what's it called, the Planck-Einstein formula, where it discusses E equals HF, which is energy is proportional to the frequency,
Yeah.
with of course the H representing Planck's constant. So the idea is that fundamentally, to integrate all of these things, what you have to do is a very, very, atomic or even beyond the cellular, the atomic level, is that you have to ensure that the bioforms in the world, it doesn't just mean humans, it means every single living thing, anything that has an image, or a builder, in the German sense from Klagis's work. They must be able to absorb and to have a capacity of emission, with these biodigital infrastructures, right, in a wireless sense. So this gets also into spectroscopy and things like that. But ultimately, that's what you're seeing here. It's the multiplier itself is to bring all of this into a sort of to bring all living forms into a quantized state at the atomic level, even, or cellular level, whatever you believe, and then of course to make them mergeable with these technologies.
Just another one. Like, if you imagine that, for example, the human body is a highly complex field of kind of signals on the electromagnetic spectrum, and including light and photons, etc. And it's incredibly dense and complex, and it's absolutely sort of unapprehendable in a sense. However, the tech, like some of this stuff, right, with these metamaterials, you can basically have a surface that is capable of receiving photonic information, data, right, from the human body. And you can, so if you imagine this surface of this device, if you will, maybe have millions and millions of millions of photonic cells, each one of which is capable of intercepting sort of a given frequency of photonic light that might emit from a biological source. Now, you can tune, because it's a metamaterial, you can actually tune it like you would tune a radio, and you can tune sort of millions of cells on to intercept different frequencies, and you can do this in real time. So every aspect of this device is like highly adapted to intercept this very dense photonic environment, like emission environment that might come from a biological source like the human body. And each one of those cells on the device can be sensitized. It can be electromagnetically sensitized to resonate and pick up a certain given frequency of, whatever the emission may be. And you may say, well, one might think, well, surely you can't penetrate. You might even get your head around the concept of, right, if the body is emitting an ultra weak signal, then it's possible to intercept it. But surely you can't get into DNA and things like that. Well, actually, you can, and we've seen that with X-rays and with MRI type imaging, various medical devices, which can get right down inside you and into you, and into your nervous system, etc. So it can be done, and so really, where it's and this is just a very basic sort of overview of the kind of tech that we're talking about. But let me see if I can kind of come up with
Well, there was something else I was going to mention. I had a list here of, so for example, there's a distinction that we see in the academic world with these technologies, and I know this only because when I was in university, just very it wasn't a long time, but I used the sort of free access to the library to download a lot of ebooks for free, and also a few things on biodigitalism from the free access that I had to the university's articles and things like that. And what I found was there was a distinction between passive signatures and active technology. And so what they were basically stating is that to bring this into being, this sort of wide body area network, or these Internet of all things sensors, and also this ties in with digital twinning and all of this, is that one cannot just sit passively. One cannot just emit passively, right? For these things to pick it up. Actually, you require to turn the human being almost into simultaneously both a power source, a microcontroller, and an antenna. So, I found that interesting. There was an article that I posted in the Discord, and I can't bloody find it now. But this guy was basically saying we have to bring this about. And so, basically, to give a very, sort of minimalist definition of these three things, the power source would be to sort of amplify and transmit the signal back out, right? And the microcontroller would be the process to, and this is the most important one, it's the middleman that sort of processes the raw analog frequency or signature of the human being, and of course all their sort of cellular data into digital data. And then the third one is that of the antenna, which is a sort of it's the sensor or the sense organ that is tuned specifically to sort of capture that macroscopic radio wave, and both at the receiver and of course us as the sender, and of course both of them will be both simultaneously sender and receiver. So this is how you'll develop a negentropic system, a system that's homeostatic. This is in this constant negative feedback loop, before there. Oh yeah, we've got photos here. I want to invite. Yeah, I'll put these up, Zeal. I wanted to invite Noble just to make a quick comment on what we've covered thus far, and I've got a few videos and such that we will go through, and I want to get your opinions upon it, gentlemen. But without further ado, Noble, please.
Yeah, thank you both for providing the depth, right? The level of detail. For many of the folks that are tuning into this video, I suspect have some sense of doing their own due diligence and trying to uncover what's going on in the world. They have some sense of what we're referring to and why we're referring to it. But, ultimately, us contrarians, those who are kind of seeing beyond the veil, so to speak, we require some level of nuance, right? Some level of detail. Is this real in quotes, or is this fantastical? And Zeal, thank you. I think you just gave kind of a first round pass at the legitimacy of this technology and the fact that it's not a far cry from a potentiality. More or less, at the end of the day, just to sum it up, as we continue to go through the detail, is to allow for a human being to become a node on a network, right? The network of all things, this type of thing. So, and again, thank you for just indicating that this technology isn't fringe and bleeding edge as well, right? These technologies have been made available for quite some time now. And I think we all can understand that which is made available to the rank and file in the forms of white papers and ResearchGate and all of this type of thing is probably a decade or two or three or longer kind of behind what is really considered bleeding edge, right? So anyway, whereas my area of interest isn't into the depth of the technicalities. I do think it's rather important to at least address it. And I thank you guys both for doing that. So that's what I have to say at this point.
We'll go into. Well, I just want to show these. Do you have any other comments to make, Zeal, as I'm showing these images?
Not really. It's just like I'm just trying to think of the thing in a kind of as basic, like almost like a mechanical understanding of it, but not like, I'm just trying to get my head around how might it work, like what kind of
Mhm.
what needs to talk to what, and how would you, like things like noise, for example, are very critical in this discussion because to get into that environment and decipher and intercept and get the data out of it, like it's, what kind of tech would you need? And it makes sense that you have something that can be tuned, to given frequencies and, on a nano scale, that's really super small scale. And as well, these concepts of circuits, like, we're talking about the, you know, internet of all things, the internet of nano things, and the internet of bio nano things, etc. And that we're basically in a bubble walking through a dense signal environment. Our bodies are, at any given point in time right now. So, and as we walk through that environment, we're displacing the static sort of signal field. We displace that signal field, and that displacement can be measured, and we can be interfaced with, and it can figure out what's like basic stuff like where we are, what our body temperature is, our heart rate, but it can also decipher a lot more nuanced information, including what's happening in the central nervous system at the level of DNA and even in the human brain. So all of this stuff is very novel right now. So I think this is coming back into your story, Silas, about the hantavirus thing, or your interest in this kind of news item. And that's why I think the psychological warfare thing is coming in now, because, and I'll let you take up on this with your own thoughts on this, Silas, but I think that the powers that be are aware that the public are going to become slowly aware of this information, and they need to control how it comes out. So I suspect there's been some sort of a soft leak with regard to molybdenum disulfide or various different 2D materials that are used for these 2D semiconductors into this hantavirus story as a way to waylay and kind of contain it, or even partially hang it out. But anyway, I'll let you take up, Silas, with your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, yeah, that was something I was going to get into, perhaps after this video, because it provides sort of the semblance of my ideas surrounding it. Now, there was I was going to ask you guys, do you suspect that what we're seeing, and of course a lot of this is coming out of La Quinta Columna, they're not, I don't think they're talking about the molybdenum or however it's pronounced, but they are discussing, they're sort of resurfacing the idea of graphene oxide and it being linked to hantavirus or something like that. Is there the potential that this is all just narrative? From my point of view, yes, but ultimately it's only to sort of cover up the grander, the sort of grander schemes of this, right? It's to allow it to be digestible, not for predictive programming purposes, but to make it digestible so that I don't see it this way. I don't necessarily see AI or this Internet of all things. I don't see it as as a deity. I don't see it as divine or a divinity. Even if they were to bring in this system, ultimately they can't get what they're trying to correct is ultimately well, as Eros states, the Heraclitean flux, which is this juxtaposition, or pardon me, this characteristic of time that one can describe as war, strife, and but ultimately the sort of ever-changing nature of reality. And this is what fundamentally cybernetics and all of this attempts to provide solution for. The autopoiesis, the self-regulating system, that of negentropy, which is the negation of decay or the negation of entropy, the negation of time's sinews and effects upon oneself and of course upon power itself too. And ultimately it brings them to a point where they no longer have interaction in the outward system. Thus, they will, because of course, fundamentally, everyone will be within this singular organism, this singular biodigital organism. Therefore, they will no longer have flux. They will no longer have strife. They will no longer have death. And thus, everything will become one, will become monadic. It will become of God. And so it will return back to a sort of almost a non-existent state, because existence itself is determined by negation. So it will be brought into this state of sort of a primordial, a primordial paradise where there is no conflict, there is no passage of time. It's sort of this timeless, deathless island, this loveless isle, as David Bowie called it, and what is B-side the Superman. Very interesting song with interesting lyrics. Anyway, that's the idea I think they're pushing towards. Everything that you see, in terms of what we're, privy to here, absolutely, this is only either it's a red herring and it's incorrect, or it itself is only partially true, or of course it's totally out of date as well. But ultimately, it's because we know this to be the case because power itself is fundamentally it requires this, right? If you are one of the powerful, you're one of the philosopher kings, the elite, the ruling class, you understand in and of itself that you can continue this sort of narrative narrative ploy, these narrative ploys, this grand narrative structure, where you sort of lose one mask, don the other, lose one narrative, don the other. You can do that for quite some time, but you can't go on forever. And eventually, time takes its toll, and it asks for its due. And this obviously relates to the end of your system itself. So the only way you can get beyond that is if you take out the fundamental igniters and initiators of the mechanism of time, which is, as I've stated, it's the interaction quite literally between people. So you need to fundamentally, ultimately, biodigitally lobotomize them, so they become one with the system. You could call it a hive mind, but it's even beyond that. It's something entirely different. It's not even a hive mind, because a hive mind is to maintain the drones. It's that you want something which has the sort of controlled artificial sensation of motion, only in so much as it serves your base personal desires as the elite. So this is the idea I think they're fundamentally going for. Where it's still in its primitive stages right now. So we might be, I don't know, 40, 50 years away from it. Maybe more, who knows, right? But that's my 2 cents upon it. I hope that sort of answers your question. But jump in, Zeal.
Yeah, just like listen to Sabrina Wallace, and I don't know if like, Sabrina Wallace is controlled or not her synergy channel, but she's always stating that this stuff has been fully developed since the 1990s.
Well, yeah,
So
it would make sense if in so much as the various policies and narratives they put in place, it would almost, again, you wouldn't do all this if you hadn't the technologies there in reserve
yeah.
to deploy. So I mean, there is a potential there. Yeah, sorry, man, I interjected.
No, but at the same time, as having said that, you see, there's still the possibility that some of this is spoof or spook or a
Hmm.
phantom. So that's why it's extremely difficult to discern, because like you're trying to speak about like cutting edge science and novel science and stuff that's right on the edge of development, and we're getting information from white papers, and it's like it's difficult, and then you're looking at existing technology like for example in the field of medicine, and you're going, well, if they have that, then what else do they have, and how far, and like once you link those kinds of technologies that can interface with the human body, and you marry that up with machine learning, and you have infinite time in theory to learn, um, and you can harvest an infinite amount of data, and and crunch the numbers and learn from it, like so you can see where you get this sort of event horizon scenario where eventually you literally create a new system. It kind of has to come into being by virtue of those moments that are meeting on the horizon.
Yeah, the self-fulfilling prophecy, it is a hyperstition, absolutely, absolutely. But
But
that,
you can predict it. You can predict it because you can see the two lines of the angle are going to meet at a point in the future. You can actually see the future coming down the line, and it's this unavoidable juggernaut of infinite data and infinite control. But like, take this with a pinch of salt, because I echo your point, Silas, that some of this could be fiction or a kind of a phantom menace, but some of it could be real, or all of it could be real just as well. And like, that's part of the issue of where we are with this kind of stuff, is that it's very difficult for us to find situational awareness, or for the average person, myself included, to to try and get a handle on what is actually going on. Where are they going with some of this stuff? Where are things headed? But as an old friend of mine would say, it would explain a multitude. It would explain a multitude if this is the case, because a lot of stuff seems to slot into position. Then you wonder, well, what are all these psyops for, and what is all this multiplicity in narratives, and where's all this technology going? And and then you start to look into this area, and you go, hang on a minute, this feels like a key to the door, and it feels like a moment of, oh, this makes sense. They know that this system is, that they have this tech, and this stuff is coming in, and they've got that predictive element. They can see where it's going to lead society. But again, like, I take it with a pinch of salt, but I get my moments where I think that this is really the only horse in the race.
Yeah, that's my unfortunate takeaway. Please, Noble, jump in.
Yes, sir. I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in there. And after kind of years of wading through neck deep on this quagmire of investigation, I think that there's some meat on this bone, unfortunately. Let's go back to late 80s or early to mid 90s, and this concept of chipping humans started to reach at least my awareness at the time. We're harkening back 30 years ago, right? And of course, everyone was going to be chipped, and that'll be the mark of the beast, and you'll scan your wrist or some part of your body or your retina, and that would deduct funds from your account, et cetera, this type of thing. Well, okay, we know contemporarily there's an organization right now that are doing a lot of neuro networking and all of this type of thing, and under the auspice that they're going to help people walk or see or hear, and these medical advances and whatnot. And of course, anybody who was around 30 years ago is maybe pointing to this neural link, for example, and saying, "Hey, see, indeed, yeah, that's smoke and mirrors. They're just they're going to help some people, but they're also going to they're going to chip us all." Well, what's kind of missed, I think, by many is the fact that 95% of humanity right now is chipped, right? and they okay, it's just a little bit different than what we anticipated. They walking around with a phone that they spent somewhere between 50 and $1,000 on, right? Everybody carries said chip, right? And so, okay, perhaps this data that is received from our phones, for example, isn't the type of data that we're talking about on this call. But I think we can all recognize the emergence of wearables, Fitbits, whatever. There's a number of human beings that are choosing to wear electronic technology that interfaces with their phone that they already carry around. Um, Glasses. So there's a number of external devices that are coming into real critical mass or around the world. If they're not there yet, they will be shortly. So even if we were to suggest that, okay, this technologies hasn't reached the stage where it can um, really be deployable at this point, um, I think that that might obscure the fact that that investigation itself might obscure one from recognizing that, wait a second, there's a lot of technology that's already in play and at scale, right? And so, at any rate, to me, motive, as I ask myself, okay, if I were king, right, if I was running the show, if I was one of the people at the high table, and I was trying to retain power, retain dominion over, in this case, humanity or perhaps all sentient beings, what would I want to do? Well, I would want to maintain some levels of control. And well, how does one do that? Well, like if you watch the show Yellowstone with what's his name, Kevin Costner, and you start
Hmm.
thinking about things from his perspective, and his perspective is he was a rancher and he had thousands of cattle. Well, he put a physical fence around his ranch so that he could maintain control over those cattle, and then he also branded them so he could differentiate between those cattle and other cattle, right? And so I think it stands to reason that the motive of those in power would want to harness us, so to speak, and also restrict our movements perhaps, or at least know where we're moving to. So when it's time to pull us back into the fray, they can do so. So at any rate, I think motives there. I think that even if the this technology that to which we're referring to isn't quite to critical mass or scale yet, there's other technologies that are in play right now that are bidirectionally sending and receiving data. And then now I think we can probably, with the three of us at least, with confidence, suggest that they're breaking the skin, right? They're going beyond the external and going internal, because that's where the real uh, gems are, right? So anyway,
Absolutely. I was going to play this video. It's around about 8 minutes long, but I'll only play maybe 4 or 5 minutes of it. And then I want to get your take upon this. I mean, ultimately, everything that we're seeing, like what you're saying, Noble, is that well, firstly, as Zeal also stated, you can take these two lines and you can see that fundamentally they're not parallel. They're going to converge at some point in time. And this is, of course, the description of power itself and what power requires. And those two lines are effectively power requires to know of that which it seeks to gain dominion over, at least consciously speaking, right? And of course, that develops into the physical control. The only way to do that is to have legibility. So, as power seeks to sort of traverse itself through time and history, it develops these technologies with the singular focus of increasing the legibility of those that they control. So, as you're saying, Noble, the phone itself, yes, is a very good tool for this legibility, right? Meaning that we become readable and predictable to the system itself. However, it's not quite under the skin yet. It hasn't become a totalizing force that is inescapable. It can still be escaped. But you'll notice every technology is getting closer and closer and closer to our minds. Virtual reality, of course, and virtual reality goggles and all of this is probably the next phase in this, and you see it's getting closer and closer to the mind, to being under the skin, to being a subdermal technological implant. And so what this will eventually lead to, I think, is they will try to geo-engineer human beings to have this biodigital quality to them, even before birth itself, right? So that they will be born in a very controlled manner, and this is what we read as well from the science fiction writers who were basically just socially priming the public for this. Of course, they were similar to the dialogue writers of the Renaissance and ancient time. So this is leading us to what they perceive as a utopia, which isn't a good place. It's a place of nothingness. This is the idea. They want nothingness because they want nothing interacting. Because if nothing interacts, if nothing sort of it poses any sort of friction with another thing, you don't get any flame. You get no spark. You get no. Everything is basically neutered. You neuter existence itself, right? And I'll just play this video, and I want to get your takes upon it.
I have bad news and I have worse news. The bad news is that we're heading for techno-feudalism. The worst news is that this outcome is all but guaranteed in a pattern that you could call overdetermined or inevitable. Yuval Noah Harari has popularized the term useless class, but if you're not familiar, I'll catch you up. The idea is that AI is obviously about to outstrip the intelligence of most humans and then all humans, which means if your livelihood, contribution, or differentiating factor is your intelligence, then you're about to be economically useless, forever, the end. In online circles and social media, the term is a bit darker and more realistic. They say permanent underclass, usually in the context of prepare to be a member of the permanent underclass, or you have a year or two to escape the permanent underclass. But both of these terms are too generous. Why? Because they include the term class, which implies civic standing that may or may not actually exist. History is rife with examples of disempowered, marginalized, and disenfranchised people. Calling them a class is charitable at best and outright dangerous at worst. Chinese peasants under corvée labor systems were pressed into service and died in droves to build ancient China's mega projects, including canals and the Great Wall. They were not slaves insofar as their service was not permanent, but it was forced and often lethal. Why? Because China could afford to waste lives. The fertile river valleys produced an annual crop of humans, a renewable resource that warlords and emperors could treat as disposable. Keep in mind that they still needed these humans under this regime, and mortality rates in those projects were often north of 50%. Under a fully automated economy where robotic soldiers fight the wars and AI agents run the businesses, your body is a net negative to the economic system. The Nazis used an even darker term, which is more apt to what you will be under this regime: useless eater. Technically, the Nazis used this term to describe disabled people. Lovely, I know. But it's worth naming the anxiety outright. I am merely giving words to the fears and articulating them clearly. Personally, I was resistant to this worldview. That is, until I started researching it for my next book. You see, we all live under Enlightenment-era delusions that there are so-called natural rights of man. But in reality, those are legal fictions. Historically speaking, such grandiose language of the Enlightenment and other romantic thinkers came after the blood had already been spilled. We remember events like the American Revolution and Glorious Revolution proudly, but make no mistake, they were bloody affairs. Wealthy thinkers and poets came afterwards and wrote pretty language to justify the bloodshed and the new way of being post hoc. That's why my next book centers on what I call a realist theory of rights. All human rights, all human dignity have been secured through coercive force. Sometimes that means strikes and revolts. In other cases, it requires mass withdrawal. Sure, there are plenty of arguments to be made that we are all endowed with some divine rights by the Creator, but those rhetorical flourishes mostly serve as shelling points, which are ideals to rally around, but there is no substitute for coercive extraction of concessions. Rather than borrow the Nazi terminology, I have my own term for how most humans will be treated under a fully automated regime: redundant biomass. Let me say that again. You will be redundant biomass. The darkest possibility that some people outline is a self-sealed system where the owners of capital, the elites, simply ignore us. They secure every step of production from mines and farms to luxury goods with AI and robotic security, then monitor the rest of us with automated surveillance and simply wall us off. I would have once scoffed at such ideas. Too conspiratorial. Such outcomes were basically impossible under democracy, right? Having looked at the historical record, I am no longer willing to bank on the goodwill of power. When the British Empire let millions of Bengalis starve simply because they wanted the food for other purposes and wrote off the loss of labor as a temporary labor shortage, that was an act by a so-called civilized people. I gave a talk at Duke University last year, and during that talk I warned that human nature is still dangerous. One student disagreed, saying that we've evolved beyond that. Evolution is not that fast. And also, human nature will reassert itself when push comes to shove. Yes, it's true that we Westerners generally live in a very stable, safe environment. Many have done for generations, so it's easy to forget how humans can actually be. When I said that the outcome was all but assured, I used the word overdetermined. And here's what that means. There are many forces at play, powerful trends that all pull us in the same direction. The first and most powerful is geostrategic competition between the US and China. This is the Cold War 2.0. And it guarantees that AI, robotics, and automation will be treated as first-class political and capital priorities for decades to come. In that time frame, automation will surpass all human capabilities. The second most powerful force pushing us in this direction is capitalism and neoliberalism directly. The data center and AI build-out is the largest private mega project in human history, full stop. By 2030, we will have spent trillions of dollars on AI infrastructure, which will eclipse every mega project in history, public or private. We've already surpassed the Apollo program and Manhattan Project. The market has already spoken. The third major force is rational economic decisions combined with creative destruction. When push comes to shove, every business, household, and government makes the economically rational decision to go with the cheaper option, even when the cheaper option is sometimes worse. As AI and robotics ramp up, automated goods and services will be significantly cheaper. They will also end up being better and faster. Now multiply that preference by 340 million Americans, millions of businesses, and 200 nations across the planet. This creates what's called an attractor state. The inevitable outcome is a maximally automated economy. That includes all production and military. Why? Because humans are slow, dumb, and expensive. Humans are always the weakest link where technology is concerned. Now, it's not all gloom and doom. I am a techno-optimist and a techno-progressive, but I am also a structural realist, which means I take incentive structures and attractor states and macro trends very seriously. We're arguably already living under techno-feudalism. I had my YouTube channel demonetized because my feudal lord Google decided I had violated some arbitrary policy. Well, there goes more than a quarter of my income. Whoops. And my appeal process is an automated process that is checked by some non-English speaking worker across the globe who's just checking a few boxes. Meanwhile, tech bros in Silicon Valley want you to believe the market will work it out. We are heading for full automation, which has the potential to be both beautiful and glorious. Imagine fully automated cancer research, space exploration, and environmental rehabilitation. Solar farms that build themselves, schools that solve Bloom's 2 sigma problem, and more. That is the promise of automation. But all technology is a double-edged sword. The self-same automation that can liberate us from drudgery and create abundance also, by definition, makes us economically, structurally, and politically irrelevant. That is obviously not good. And this is the focus of the next leg of my work. For now, my book Labor Zero, which looks exclusively at the economic and household income question of this post-labor world we're building, comes out later this year. We're aiming for a launch in July or August. I've already begun my next book, which takes a hard look at the civics, power, and governance of a post-labor world. The outlook is grim, but there is still a path to a brighter future. After all, the owners of capital are still dependent upon human labor, at least for now. That means we have a collective veto. We can halt all production. But make no mistake, we are losing that veto power inch by inch to the automation. Thank you.
Yeah, so sorry, I thought it was quite a good video just to play all of that. So the idea that's really being expressed there is that this is happening. You know this firsthand, Zeal. You've worked on these data center projects, so this infrastructure is being built out, whether we like it or not. Of course, this is the issue as well. See, I actually think, of course, many in the conspiracy culture will see all of this that we're discussing right now, and they'll see it as, in a way, a sort of that we are reacting to all of this, to the mainstream, that we're being trapped by the mainstream, that this is being put out by the mainstream itself, to ensure that we become locked in fear and thus trapped and so on and so forth. I'm not necessarily fearful of this. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, what can you do, right? We can only sort of speak out against it and draw attention to all of it. But here's the thing. I actually, a bit of a reversal, reverse card. I actually think the conspiracy culture itself was cultivated over 20, 30 years. If you're correct, Zeal, and they had this technology back in the 90s, they were already making preparations and plans to institute this fourth industrial revolution, this dark enlightenment, this technet. Thus, they would have been putting into place the informational containment chambers, both online and offline. And so you need to strengthen those. For example, let's take conspiracy culture. Those are the emergent intellectual class that could actually subvert all of this. They could establish revolutionary ideals and movements that could upend and overturn this. So what do? Well, you basically bring them on a pathway towards what fundamentally I would describe as solipsism, where they believe all of this is fake, it's all a hoax. All of these data centers are just props. There's nothing to them. It's just a big, elaborate ruse, which is a rather dangerous, it's a dangerous gamble to take, because the other side of the gamble, the outcome, is that, of course, as a redundant biomass, you become totally deleted, and you're at a point where you can't do anything about it. So I think all of the conspiracy culture was developed to hide this, to provide a cover for, so that you paralyze and you neuter and castrate the potential emergent competition to this. And so, that's sort of a polemical stance that I'm exploring right now. But I don't know if anyone has any opinions upon that idea.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, please,
I
Zeal,
don't
you
know. Like
first.
my kind of stance on it is like basically that we're at war. Like a new kind of warfare, and the warfare is against society, really against us. So, like, even though it's a dark and kind of paranoid position to take, like in one sense, in another sense, I'm personally just trying to itemize the information and kind of just get a sense of what's potentially happening to us. So I kind of defer to the worst case scenario as being the actual scenario, because it costs me in terms of, it's not the happiest kind of thing to be thinking about. But in the worst case scenario, like, basically it's good news if I'm wrong and I haven't kind of lost anything except for maybe a few extra gray hairs wondering about what's going on. But if I'm right, I'm a few steps ahead of the game, or at least I'm I'm on point, you know. So that's kind of my mentality with this kind of stuff. Is like I'm watching it and I'm itemizing it and I'm trying to see where are the hits coming, or where are the hits likely to come, and what is the nature of their game.
Well,
So
here's
I
something
kind
I want to ask before Noble jumps in. You've worked on
of
these data center jobs. Would you agree with the premise that they're all just props, elaborate ruses and props?
no, I think myself right off the bat, I think that's far fetched kind of relativism and kind of head in the clouds kind of stuff. I wouldn't absolutely would not agree with that. I think that they are de facto harvesting. They are like if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. To me, they are what they are, you know. And that's not a dig at what you mentioned as a potential. I agree, it's a potential, but I think it's way far off the. That's too far out there for my money.
Oh no, I concur. I'm just
Yeah,
putting it forward. I'm just asking your opinion. No, I totally agree. But this is what a lot of the conspiracy culture I think is bred, and I see it being cultivated by the system itself to basically
yeah,
hide what they're doing, so they have no
yeah.
opposition. You know.
Well, like for example, if what you're saying is, and I'm not aware of this analysis, but like if there are people out there that are thinking that all this data thing is just a hoax to cover, I think those people at best are misled, and but are more likely those kinds of narratives are seeded by the power structure as a kind of a diversion, like a war kind of thing. And it's like this thing with this hantavirus chip and its connection with this molybdenum disulfide kind of this story, like where has this come from? Like I'm curious to know that where has this concept come from, or is this, you know, is this something that has been leaked out into the so-called truth community? Because if it has, it doesn't surprise me, because I would suggest that it's another attempt to obfuscate and
Yeah,
mislead.
I totally agree. And this is what just recently, before you jump in, Noble. Sorry, man. Just recently, there's on Fox News. You know, the whole internet's going haywire over it, right? Well, at least the sort of fringe or dissident masses and the various ideological circles they're in, regarding a guy on Fox News, and you could see what they're saying is the seam of his mask that he's wearing, right? The silicon mask, and you're thinking, why are you paying this any attention? Everything that's coming down the pipe, why are you paying this any attention? And moreover, as well, all of this is actually a sort of simplified belief structure. What you see in the conspiracy culture is ultimately, and this is my opinion, again, it can be polemical and it probably will be highly caustic to many people. But from my standpoint, my honest, genuine standpoint is that what we're seeing is that they put out these baits for us to sort of jump on like a bitch on heat, and we utilize all the fakery so that we can reinstill the idea, this sort of dogmatic idea of the pattern that they are just deceptive and all of this is fake, right? This is why they put out the fakery. And moreover, so it gives us the illusion, right, that fundamentally there is no, it's a toothless tiger. There's nothing to it. It's a paper tiger. But because that's what they want you that's the semblance they want to provide you, the sentiment they want to provide you, the perspective. Because if they're up to no good, if they're about to unleash a technology that is so utterly existence shattering, then, and of course it makes us overnight redundant biomass, then of course they're going to want to keep this close to their chest, and they're going to want you to believe that you are powerful where you're powerless. They're going to want you to believe that everything they do is just fake and we're just trying to scare you to keep you in line and there's nothing more to it, and so on and so forth. Because if people believe that the system is just fake and it's just an omnipotent wizard or illusionist within a theater play, then then the idea is implicitly that is that none of this has any real consequence. It has no physical bearing. There's no physical manifestation of it. It's basically a spectral apparition, and you don't need to pay it any heed. And moreover, as well, the idea is within this conspiracy culture is that, well, we're trying to do away with fear because fear is the mind killer. No, apathy is the mind killer. Sorry, Frank Herbert got it wrong. Apathy is the mind killer. Fear is a survival mechanism, right? I'm not saying become fearful to the point where you become cognitively exhausted, which is, albeit, what we're probably seeing with the conspiracy culture. But we need to have fear. It's certain things, right? Fear isn't a dirty word. It's threat detection. It's like what you're saying, Zeal. What's the worst case scenario? You know, you've got to look at all this. You've got to be rooted in the physical world because this is where the system exists. It doesn't exist on the screen. It doesn't exist in the forums. It doesn't exist on the various conspiratorial channels. It exists in the here and now. We know this because it controls us. Don't pay your tax. Don't pay your tax for a couple of years. See how long it takes them for the bailiffs or what have you, or the sheriff, to break down your door and to crack your skull open with a truncheon. Right? That is the system. That's the system. And what it desires from us is sort of pretense, right? We live as the ID entity, right, rather than the real physical being. And this is the real issue with this thing, is it's almost taking your living soul and it's trying to sort of merge with that directly and to digitize it. And it's like very, very disgusting on that, I guess you could call it psycho-spiritual level. But ultimately with the conspiracy culture, just final point, is fundamentally it's not us that are in fear. I'm not fearful of anything. I mean, it is what it is. It's if you look at power long enough and how power functions, you realize this is the sort of end goal of power and how it has emerged from the human condition. They are the ones that are in fear, right? They don't want to look at these things, so it's all props, it's all theater. It doesn't have any real consequence. And that's the danger I see with conspiracy culture. I don't think this stuff is necessarily fake. Maybe there's a few spoof things here and there that sort of throw us off the trail. But I actually think the psyop is conspiracy culture itself and what it's sort of morphed into. And this total disregard, this inability to face the uncomfortable and inconvenient truth, which is ironic, you know? But that's my 2 cents. I don't know. Do you want to jump in, Noble? Sorry, I took a bit of a rant there.
No, absolutely. Before I press on, quick Wi-Fi check. How am I coming through? Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, spot on, man.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to review Silas's most recent works, really over the last couple of months, but one comes to mind, the weaponization of disbelief. I think it's brilliant, frankly. And he just recently, just a couple of minutes ago, started speaking to this very thing. Ultimately to hobble us, right? To take us off the chessboard, right? If we believe that everything is a ruse or fake or toothless in nature, then we're just going to continue to keep our head in the sand or stay disengaged and whatnot. So, but when you marry that up with the idea that we were speaking to at the onset of this show, the nature of these various viruses or outbreaks, in quotes, as being covered to something, right? I just ask us to consider, to cover for what? What is the reason to engage in psychological warfare? Why do they wish to take us off the chessboard, right? And particularly those that would be predisposed to question authority and question the narrative, this type of thing. And so, I would like to suggest that the ultimately, as they pepper us with fakery, with hoaxery, with crisis actors, with in the beginning and the onset when we were all of these horrific, seemingly horrific things, right? We the Of course there was an emotional response to this, and we were engaged in this, and it elicited all sorts of different emotions and yeah, abject fear and this types of things. But as we move towards seeing the fakery for what it is, as they move us toward that on purpose by showing on Fox News a commentator literally, where you could literally see the latex. I saw the video that you were referring to, Silas. Literally, you can see the fact that the man is wearing a mask, and it's just one of those things, much like the missions to the moon and this type of thing, where there's so much obvious deception. They want us to move into this position of viewing much of what's happening to us is fake. Look, the first time that I was exposed to this idea, I have to admit, I was not of age in order to understand it, but it's the first time that I saw The Wizard of Oz, right? For those of you who don't recall, when Dorothy goes from Kansas into the dream state and goes into Oz, we're presented with color. I'm quite certain it was the first color movie or partially colorized movie in the United States, if not the one of them, right? And then, of course, at the end of the show, at the end of the movie, we get to see behind the curtain. We get to see that the all powerful Oz that was ruling by a fear, the masses in the Emerald City and on its outskirts was doing it as a ruse, right? It was fake. And so this damn idea of fakery has been seeded into us since well beyond contemporary times, right? It goes back a long time. So flash forward to cover for what though? At the end of the day, if the magician gets us to look to his left hand because he's doing something with his right hand. And so I always ask the question, okay, well, what in the hell are they trying to do then? And this elaborate Hollywood, all the world is a stage production that we've been presented to at every level, then what are they covering up, right? And I would suggest the very topic that we're talking about today is it, right? What could be more I guess, diabolical than wiring us all up to the network? I mean, what could be more of a mechanism of abject control, right? And so why not get us to cast our gaze to the Middle East for the perpetual wars, or to the television set because we need to see whether or not we have to put on a mask, keep us in this state of suspense um, every day, all day, every day, right? And so what for, right? It's so that they can erect the digital fence. It's so that they can create the digital gulag, and of course, we haven't spoke to it now, but in addition to the surveillance apparatus that's being installed all around us, everywhere we turn, and perhaps even in our own bodies, we all know that we're moving from the analog to a digital currencies, right? And so every single transaction that we do anywhere in the world will be fed into these data centers, right? And ultimately be tied to credit scores and this type of thing. And so I believe in short, at the end of this little monologue here is that this we are witness to all of this is cover for violating us in the most heinous way possible. Um, right, to totally try to capture this. And I think before we wrap up this particular video, let's get around to, okay, well, how is this going to inform our um, our conscious action, and how are we going to press on if we assume for a second that some of what we're talking about today is indeed real. How are we gonna press on in this life and whatnot? So
Well, absolutely, yeah. It's see, there's also, there certainly is a higher sort of psycho-spiritual dimension to this as well. And this is the thing. This is the thing I think that ultimately this technology is trying to hide. Because if the nature of the soul is unquantifiable to power itself, though power requires it, by, of course, hoodwinking the population into effectively propping up the hierarchy, then, I mean, ultimately this explains, the sort of dastardly thing that they're after, which is they're trying to take our eros, our love, our soul, even our bodies, right, which is the expressible instrument of the soul. They're trying to take all that and they're trying to, tune it, if you will, to what ultimately is a sort of planetary machine, right? This completely geistological thing. Oh, we seem to have lost them there. Oh, yeah. I'll see if he can. Oh, yeah, he's here. Sorry, Noble, you there, man? You back?
Yes. I'm not sure what happened there. Where did you lose me? Or where did I lose you?
You lost me pretty much just at the end of what I was saying anyway. So do you have comment upon that idea that basically what they're trying to do is I mean, you even see this, of course, as well with the dumbing down process in the US and all of this. And I think it's a very interesting idea, and it's something I'm also sort of open to right now, which is that, like the Wizard of Oz, Fight Club, I mean, the list is literally endless. Uh, Matrix, of course. I mean, there's tons of them. The Truman Show. All of it is almost programming us into this Gnostic framework. Eyes Wide Shut's another one. So they want us to actually view this through a sort of Gnostic lens. I think, and what that does is they want us to view the system just purely as fake, as theater, as ritual, which is, of course, what you see in Eyes Wide Shut, right? You see, of course, you see the physical orgies, you see all this physical debauchery, but you don't. I think he leaves the place before you see the physical ritual where she is sacrificed. So I always thought the implication was from that, the inference is that perhaps they're trying to show you it's all cape and theatre. It's all just masks. Which of course it is to a degree. But how is that spurring on the physical architecture, the physical presence of the system itself? And moreover as well, what you're seeing with these technologies too, it's basically turning the entire flux of our soul, everything from the body, which is the instrument of the soul, that of the sweat, the heartbeat, neural firings, biophotons, and it's taking all that, and it's also taking some of the, the more perhaps deeper feelings of the analog, and it's translating it into a sort of rigid binary language, right? That of course the system can read, and of course the system can read through its machines. So it's very, very sick on that level. I mean, there's really no other way to describe what they're wanting. What's the teleology of this? Why are they seeking to distract us? It's like what you're saying. This appears to be the only reason. See, power only controls because power is in constant flux. It's seeking to progress to something. If it wasn't progressing, the elites would just end it all in civil war and kill each other. Because sure, you can keep this wheel spinning round and round and round and keep everyone in a sort of stagnancy, right, of an event, which absolutely, yeah, the system does to a degree. But the pyramid, the apex of the pyramid, the elite themselves, the ruling class, they themselves are progressing to something. They aren't standing still. That's only for the lower rungs of the pyramid, or the lower rungs of the ladder. They've got their sights set on something, and of course, what their sights are set on is, once you get to this point, you lose any sort of modicum of, through all of the dynasties, this dynastic pattern of control, you lose all semblance of your humanity and empathy and anything like that. You're no longer a wise elder anymore, a philosopher king, right? You start to utilize everything that you know to control society. You utilize it to try and escape death. And by the way, this is fundamentally what we see in some of the mythos surrounding Atlantis and other precursor civilizations. Even in Kabbalah, they have these ideas too, these myths surrounding, the wise elders, or the noble wizards, or what have you, turning into sort of wicked, or wicked sorcerers or something along those lines. And you actually see this in Tolkien's work as well, right? With the Numenorians, that they become entranced with Morgoth, where Morgoth states that death isn't a gift from Iluvatar. It is designed to keep you imprisoned, and you must escape from death, and so on and so forth, right? So, I mean, fundamentally, that's what you're seeing here. This is a place for them, a technology, a point of origin from where they can digitally terraform the human substrate, so that they can bring the world into a point where there is no longer any sort of interaction going on. Thus, there is no Heraclitean flux. There's no time. There's no war, strife, the ever-changing nature of the world. Thus, in and of itself, you don't have the problems associated with basically human thinking and the human mind, and this revolving of the human around the most totalizing of all negations, which is death itself. So because you've got no interaction, no one has any sort of they've got no ideas surrounding death. They've got no, which is that is what sort of brings us into that Heraclitean flux of time and strife and war. And thus, you have basically a perpetual flat line system. You've basically got, as Kabbalah calls it, the Adam Kadmon state, the primordial man. It's this state of just nothingness. Utopia, quite literally utopia. So sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, man. If you want to jump in, Noble, and we're joined again by Zeal.
This might be a good opportunity to introduce some things I've been thinking about, and it's it goes to motive. What is really desired? In other words, why do you corral the animal? Why do you corral the human? Why do you wish to control? Right? It's and you just presented a viable motive, a deeper motive for the rationale to go through this effort, or just the nature of power, for example. Let me maybe throw some other thoughts your way, and I'd love to get your thoughts on these, and also Zeal's. It's the way that I was thinking about this previous was the idea of the import of controlling perception, right? And of course, the powers that be have their finger on the apparatus that delivers the sensory stimuli to human beings, right? Hollywood, the music industry, media, this type of thing, right? And so they've captured, for the most part, most of humanity's perception, which of course uh, essentially helps a native formulate beliefs, and then once their beliefs are formed, that generally informs one's action, right? And then so if you are priming um, the cattle at the level of the perception, well, then you can predict, or you can essentially um, guide the actions ultimately of the human beings in this case on the earth, right? So, and that seems like that would be desirable for those that are in power, this type of thing. So, but why? I mean, so can we put on let's put on our kind of deep esoteric spiritual lens for a moment and consider the nature of our experience, the nature of this reality. And of course, obviously, those that are watching this are going to have various different perspectives on what's really going on in this particular realm. But I'm of the notion that human beings are, at least in part, part of the process of creating their own experience. Right? We are co-creators. We and I probably have a more aggressive position on this. I think that humans have a real agency, and in other words, we are responsible for our experience in this particular realm, right? And so it stands, if that it has any weight, right? Um, if that has any bearing whatsoever, then it stands to reason. Again, if you get control of the device by which a human being takes action, essentially you grab the reins of their manifestation machine, the agency of a human being to bring forth manifestation in this particular realm. And so, of course, why not do Hollywood movies and the music industry and doing all of this sleight of hand and deception and whatnot? Because they can get us, in quotes, to go and do things that they want us to do, right? And so one would suggest that if you can go deeper, if you can get inside where the sensory apparatus, kind of like if you can get into the core part of the machine, the compute device of a human being. In other words, if you can bypass the boundaries that human beings put up. Say, for example, like just you close your eyes, you can't see the light, right? You open your eyes, you can see what's in front of you. Well, when you start talking about some other pretty obscure technologies, I'm sure you guys have studied, like voice to skull, right? And you can get beyond these this more analog, for lack of a better tools by which they can maintain dominion over the very beings that create our shared experience. And so that's kind of what I was thinking. And so, but if we go back to this concept of loose, and I'm almost to my point here, this concept of loose that you've spoke about so many times, Silas, and of course you have two Zeal, and I think Monroe is one of the ones that pioneered this idea, and it stands to reason that us human beings, we are radiant, and we're emotional beings, and we're energetic, as Neil suggested at the outset of this video. We're not just lumps of biomass. In my perspective, we are the very thing that which creates this shared experience. So at any rate, excuse me, one would suggest that when we are distorted as human beings, that energy isn't as pure. It's not as prime. It's not as optimal, if you will. Why not ultimately? Why not? I mean, well, I'm kind of thinking maybe beyond what we're even talking about right now. But why not create for those that remain after this wiring up seems to be happening of us humans to the network? For those of us who adapt to that and remain, why not corral us into cells, so to speak, or hive, so to speak, where we find coherence? Actually, encouraging the human to actually resonate at higher levels, like bear better fruit, right? Why not? I mean, it's kind of like the fatted calf um, analogy I was sharing with you the other day, brother. It's like, hey, man, at the right before the calf goes to slaughter, right? They fatten it up and they marble the meat and all of this stuff. Why? Well, it's more desirable for those that are taking part in the delicacy of the calf or whatnot. So my what I've been kind of playing around with is why wouldn't you want to, if indeed human being is has the majesty and the agency that I'm suggesting, ultimately after you've garnered control over most of the masses, why wouldn't you want to sweeten it? Why wouldn't you want it to bring in the coherence? Because I would think that that would be the most potent elixir that they could extract in some way um, towards whatever uh, outcome they're looking for. But anyway, I'll pause there and let you guys weigh in on that. I know it's a lot to take on board, but maybe I've got too much idle time on my hands these days.
Don't we all? I'll let Zeal jump in as he's joined back, but I have a few things to say upon that. But if you want to jump in, Zeal.
Yeah, you kind of caught me on the hop there. What was the main point?
Uh, I can. The main point is that the fruit. At the end of the day, when we look at motive and we ask ourselves why are they wiring us up to the network? Why do they want to retain control? The Kevin Costner is because he wanted to keep his cattle so they could go to slaughter, so that they could feed. He could make money, and then he could feed the people that wanted to buy this. What I'm suggesting is that human agency um, is the real magic and is the real fruit. And so at the end of the day, once you corral human agency, that which is responsible for generating the shared experience that we're having in this realm, why not heighten or sweeten the louche, so to speak? Why not bring it into coherence and in love and then extract it, as opposed to right now what I believe that they've done, like in Monsters Inc., right? They've scared the shit out of the little kids and then they extract the louche. Okay, it's energy, and maybe it's a potent energy, fear, for example. But wouldn't you think that love, for example, or harmony? Think about the nature of a song. When there is a song being played, and there is harmonics are involved, we are drawn to the harmony of a certain song, right? You guys are both musicians. When it's distorted, I suppose some people are drawn to the distortion, but it's less sweet. And so I was suggesting that at the end, once they get their arms around us digitally, why don't they, for those of us who have adapted to the augmentation, why not put us into coherence and then attempt to extract the sweet louche?
If you want to jump in, Zeal, I have a few opinions to mention upon this. But if you want to jump in first.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like as if the whole thing seems to be trauma based. So it's the louche that they're trying to extract, and as Silas has said before, they have this subjective view of morality, and they effectively are insane. So it's like I don't see any love in it really, any the pure spirit or logos or in any of their mo, or it's not in their soul if they have a soul. So like if I take your main point, it's like about harvesting energy from human beings, and from what I can gather anyway, it seems to be taking a very dark kind of a path, but that darkness kind of is subjective. It Like our darkness is their light, it's their Lucifer, the Luciferic kind of thing, instinct of it's the inevitable trajectory of Lucifer is kind of to become cut off. It's just disappear into the self realization, self actualization, but it's at the cost of any connectivity So ironically, like in a time where we're talking about connectivity, and we've been at the same time completely cut off. So it's a strange kind of a dichotomy. Anyway, Silas, go ahead.
Well, there's something I actually want to mention on this. It's sort of synchronistic, but Eros he's been talking about this guy called Andrew Chumbly, and he is part of something called the Cultus Sabbati. Now, ultimately, it's the same sort of ideas that he expresses that you find within most of the rest of the occult, because, of course, this is exactly what is found within the rest of the occult. But he states this, and I think this is from his Dragon Book of Essex, and he states, quote, "Herein lie the skulls of all mortal gods and goddesses. These serve the faithful as masks for the Sabbat." What he means there, just to reference, is that the mortal gods and goddesses are those of the ruling class. And this idea, and also as well, of course, they are basically every god and goddess that we find, bar none, right? They're all abstractions. They're born of the ruling class's minds. And what they are is the projection of the ruling class. So, in so much as it generates legitimacy for them, right? And of course, provides a sort of, a sort of rallying cry that you can then use to either whip the masses into being, into creating, into doing, into establishing things for the ruling class, or of course it provides them sort of a distraction, mental masturbation, essentially, to ensure that they become emotionally placated and things such as this. By the way, this is tied in with what I'm about to read here. It's tied in with and what you were mentioning, Noble, with Deluche, to the notion of Dat Rosa Melapibus, which is a Rosicrucian mantra, which means from the rose do the bees make honey or gain the honey. So the idea is that the rose is the soul, and it's ultimately the soul is this. It is the truth regarding man, right? And the truth regarding man within the occult. And I've mentioned this prior in my works. And again, this is very controversial. Is that basically man, according to the occult, I'm not necessarily saying this, but according to the occult, and you take this line of thinking back far enough, is that man is fundamentally nothing. His essence is nothingness, right? That doesn't necessarily mean nothingness as in empty. What it means is a no thingness, thing meaning material, relating to material. Thus, it denotes a sort of singularity point where it's just pure stasis. It's a potential locked into, non-disparity, right? So everything just exists within everything else. Thus, it can't be delineated or demarcated, and ultimately, it has no fixed form. It's just this basically formless potential of form. I know it's paradoxical, but basically, this is what man is. That man is a paradox, right? A circle without a circumference, a point without a place. So what you're seeing with that is that the only way to provide any semblance of control upon man, firstly from man's own standpoint, is to wear masks himself. He must create his own monomyth, his own narratives. And if he doesn't do that, then the system will do it for him. And the system, the better systems that survive of power, they will make man believe that those narratives that have been created by counterfeit, by the system, that they are of man's choosing, and even perhaps of man's creation themselves. This is what I'm talking about with not just the conspiracy culture. I mean, this goes for anything in society, really, right? Any sort of ideology and dialectic. So ultimately, the philosopher kings And this is what Eros stated, and I found this this is probably the most significant thing I've ever heard. So I'm providing you it here from what I've mentioned, from what I've been relayed, and from what I can remember. Basically, the idea is that if you view the monad, which is the circle with the point, and you tie that in to the dialectic, and you can geometrically plan this out regarding what's his name, Thules, the first philosopher. He had an idea. It's called Thules' theorem, and basically you can using this theorem, you can square the circle geometrically, or near as damn it. But it also shows as well that if you take point A to point C plus an O point, which is the central point of the circle, the sort of center of the point, the first point of its diameter, and then you take those, you coordinate A and B, right, that flank O, and you sort of take them up to where they converge, to the end of the circle. At any singular point, it will create a right angle triangle, right? It will create the right angle. So what Eros is stating is, geometrically, that a right angle is ultimately the Geist. And what that Geist does is, wherever it moves around, it creates the right angle, right? Now, this is how the majority of man, man lived the majority of his life like this. He would just follow the cycles. Hence, man was nomadic, right? And man was also matriarchal, as Eros states, because the matriarchal idea of it was that again, you were just following the loop, right? You didn't have the sort of patriarchal phallus, if you will, which pierces the point, pierces the circle, the cycle, and introduces, like what the Geist does, this right angle triangle. The Geist is this sort of the active intellect which categorizes and measures everything. This is what produces technology. So I'm getting to the conundrum that we're in. I do apologize about the rant. And so that's what establishes that sort of that disparity of potential, if you will, right? It's what broke human beings from, at least psychologically. It's what broke the entire nomadic lifestyle that they had, and thrust them into civilization, right? This is the logos, or reason. And so the only, again, this is how you maintain the masses themselves, right? You allow them to wear masks as they sort of walk this fool's journey, right? Believing that they're the hero. However, if you're the philosopher king, you can actually not necessarily transcend this, right? As the masses are walking centrifugally around this circle, right? Just completely enamored by the Geist, which is the cold intellect, the categorizing mind, the technological mind, right? The mind that just sees the material, or of course the mind that just sees the abstractions and believes them to be real, right? Be it religion, philosophy, whatever it may be. However, the philosopher kings, they exist in a totally different geometrical idea of reality. They live within spirals, within spirals, within spirals. So this is what he means here, Andrew Shumbley. This is, when I say this, this is extremely, I can't quantify this, how important this is. But he states here, quote, "Here lie the skulls of all mortal gods and goddesses. They serve the faithful as masks for the Sabbat. For the timely processions of faith upon faith, so cycle upon cycle. Gods coming, gods go." So the idea is that all of these gods are just masks. All of the narratives are just masks. Everything's just a mask that's worn by those who who have transcended the bounds of that sort of circular model. They've done it by introspection, right? They like the spiral within a spiral within a spiral within a spiral, epoch within epoch within epoch within epoch. But I remain who am their motion, the elite, the philosopher kings. The living joy of creation and destruction, masked am I with death and long dominion of time. And I'll get into what this means. I won't be long. I do apologize about the rant, guys, but this is extremely important to realize, because fundamentally this explains why they would go for this technology. In fact, it explains why they could only go for this technology in this technological state of being, right? And it also explains why they would want us to deify AI, because it's another mask. Masked am I with death and long dominion of time, right? The living joy of creation and destruction. So it's the idea of the Ouroboros, the Leviathan, that they, the philosopher kings, established the system, not just to keep us perpetually turning cycle after cycle. That's for the masses, yes. But it's for them, while we are doing that in this ambulatory, somnambulist gaze, right? Devoid of any thinking. It allows them to introspectively, to centripetally try to find a way out of this place, and to also bring everything down to the biodigital convergence, quite literally, which is the singularity of state, where you don't have this Geist anymore, right? Or you have sort of, you don't even have the dialectic of the trimorph, the body, the mind, the soul. You don't have that. All you have is just them within stasis. So thus they don't interact with one another, because ultimately you live in a totally controlled system. So it is, yes, I mean, there's a part where you're sweetening them, but the only reason you're sweetening them is not because you necessarily want the harvest. You don't want their meat. It's ultimately you, as the elite, you don't want the meat. What you want, the meat for the frenzy of the Saturnalia. So everything you're seeing, all of the narratives, everything, the polycrisis, as we can call it, right? This permacrisis, this polycrisis, it's designed to bring people into a frenzy, for them to fatten the calf, which is to fatten the world with data, with competing ideologies, fractured ideologies, and then to engage in the Mithraic tauroctony, which is the slicing of the throat of that old system. This will either produce, well, firstly, it'll produce distraction. I mean, that's the superficial, right? It'll keep everyone distracted with crisis. But secondly, that will bring us either into another epoch, or it will bring us closer to the center of stasis, right? Because again, if you sort of if you go centripetally into the circle, spiral after spiral after spiral after spiral, eventually you're going to reach the point of stasis, where there's not necessarily there's no effects. There's no events or narratives that are affecting you, right? And just to mention this really quickly as well, I do apologize for going on a bit here. So here lie the skulls of all mortal gods and goddesses. So the mortal gods are the dominant paradigms and systems of control constructed by humanity. The current era worships at the altar of data, of course, predictive analytics and algorithmic certainty. So we treat the Internet of all things and the biodigital convergence as if they are omnipotent, just as they do in any system, right? Because all systems are fundamentally recalibrate and reframe the individual, the adherent, as the protagonist of the fool, right? And the system that they're versing is the villain. And the villain is always omnipotent to some degree, right? Because again, it makes for a better story if you manage to defeat him in the end. So they're basically playing out the hero's journey ideology after ideology, religion after religion. And this is an immortal architecture. They want us to believe that it's God, right? Which it's not. It's not sentient either. But again, it wants us to believe as such, because then we begin to listen to its oracular prophecies or advice. So he also states as well, so these serve the faithful as masks for the Sabbat, for the timely procession of faith upon faith. So the faithful in this technological era are those who drive the system forward, the engineers, the corporations, and the society that adopts the technology, and the humanitarian guise of it, which is mostly medical, right? Because they need to do that so they can get it under your skin, curing disease, ultimate convenience, whatever it may be. These are, and of course, the ideology of transhumanism are the masks that are worn, right? And of course, you can do this with any ideology. So we convince ourselves we are building an enlightened, interconnected utopia, or that we're building an enlightened, interconnected community or ideology, or that we ourselves are becoming more enlightened. But in reality, we're simply participating in a sort of much older primal procession, which is the relentless iterative cycle of extracting resources and building power structures, and then eventually they'll collapse, right? This is the thing. This actually can't work. By the basis of thermodynamics, this fails. It will always fail, right? You can't reach the singularity of zero, which is what they want, which allows them to sort of, as you see here, mass them I with death and long dominion of time. This is ultimately the fatal flaw of the whole system, this biodigital convergence, which is if the entire goal of the planetary wide body area network or Internet of all things, digital twinning, predictive analytics, all of that is to conquer time and death, right? So by turning all biological reality into data, right, what the system is attempting to do is actually to sort of freeze the Heraclitean flux of time, which is strife, death, and the ever-changing nature of reality. And they're trying to put it into a permanent, static, and immortal digital state. But ultimately, you can't do that, because as soon as you do that, you actually fundamentally have no underlying reality. It is the eros, or the love. It is the soul that provides reality any semblance of meaning, because it is friction. Because it is friction. Because it's in motion. Right? It's what's stated in that movie Troy, right? And Eros mentioned this as well, and I found it interesting, where he stated that Brad Pitt's character states to Bracis, I believe her name is, who's a Trojan, a princess, a priestess as well. And he says, the gods envy us, and they envy us because we are mortal. And because we are mortal, every moment is beautiful. It's more alive because it's doomed, right? And fundamentally, if they get their way, what they're going to do is they're basically going to collapse the system. This will be a really great reset, a grand epochal destruction of civilization, similar in sort of mythological scope to Atlantis, right? And they'll get rid of the living joy of creation and destruction. So they'll become mortal gods and goddesses, but it'll only be for a very short time. And so fundamentally, they actually get rid of Lush in this system. Lush is what perpetuates them, but it's also what perpetuates the system itself. See, they're hubristic. It's to the point now where I think they want to escape. They want to conquer time and death, right? Because if you have everything in the world, what purpose do you have other than to perpetuate your own life and to conquer time and death, the greatest of all foes? They can already conquer us, as we can see. I mean, we're living it. We're living proof of their conquest. Woe to the vanquished, as Caesar stated. Thus, this is ultimately what they're trying to do, right? They don't want to just have the masks that keep the the people turning around and around and around, they've always had this idea. I mean, if according to history itself, you can trace this idea back to Plato. Really, you can find it replete within medieval and Renaissance philosophers and dialogists. For example, Thomas More, he coined the term utopia. So they've always had this idea. You can see it in the plans of Zinda in Renaissance Italy. Look at the plans of it. It's literally in Atlantis, the city plans of Atlantis. It's this exact thing. It's the spiral, right? The circle within a circle within a circle within a circle, leading down to the central axis where you freeze the Heraclitean flux of time, of death, of strife, of war, of basically anything. And this is the controversial one. It's that war, strife, and the ever-changing nature of reality which provides us life. It's what provides us eros and love. It's what provides us the beauty and the enlivening sensation of the moment. You take that away, and fundamentally there is no underlying reality for us. And this is all based around because human beings circle the drain of death incessantly, right? And so ultimately that is how the philosopher kings rule the world. So I hope, sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, but I hope that sort of answered your question, Nomal. I do apologize, guys.
Not at all, man. I'm listening to you. I'm try to follow your trajectory of thought there and picking up on the bits that I can. But it's kind of fascinating stuff. A very deep insight into what's going on there. You know, like I had this kind of thought during the week that, like, you know, we've had this question so much. Who are they? Who is, as you call them, the philosopher kings? Who are they? Like, you know, and I was thinking that it's not necessarily an identity. It's those, like, if you know how to manipulate things at that level with that amount of resources, you sort of create a cam in the eye of the hurricane of space, time, life, death, love, hate. You create a little still point in the middle of it all, and it's from that point that everything is controlled. So if you know how to create that singular point, you become, you know, the philosopher kings. You become they. So in a sense, anyone can theoretically inherit that position of power. Any of us here or anyone who might be listening. But it's you know, it's maybe there's a lineage that goes way back thousands of years or millions of years even, of people who were incarnate into that knowledge of how to create that moment and rule from that point. But yeah, I just don't believe it's. I had the sense that, like, anyone could do it if you knew how to do it. You could find oneself in that position. But anyway, that was just a thought. But I'm trying to pick up on your point, Silas, about I don't know, my brain mightn't have the muscle now to get around some of that. Like, could you again just reiterate in a summary fashion one or two of those main points around like the ruling of time and of, could you just highlight those again and maybe and go back over them a little bit, just even in the shorter form, or
Yeah, sure, man.
if you don't mind.
So basically what I'm saying, of course, we'll keep the geometry aside of this, but ultimately the way this works, as you can see on the screen now, so this is what's called Thule's theorem. And basically wherever this B point, you know, think of this as the Geist, which is the abstractionism, which is the masks themselves, right? That allow, you know, are provided to us by the system, and we will wear several during our lifetime, right? And we will be actors on this stage. And as you can see here, this keeps us going around ambulatory. This keeps us going around in an ambulatory fashion around the circle, right? around it, and the central point here is that of the it's that of the soul, right? It's that of the actual true essence of man, which is ultimately a point of nothingness, right? And that point of nothingness isn't necessarily nothing. It's no thingness. So thing would be materiality. So it's that which is beyond materiality. It's where everything is contained in a singularity point. So this is the omega point that they're after. This is what Nick Land talks about. And ultimately, the way that the philosopher kings work is that they don't walk this same path as, of course, the masses do, or, of course, as nomadic hunter-gatherers did, you know, cycle, just in a cycle, if you will, right? View life, birth, life, death, this idea. They don't view it like that. What they view is, and Eros can expand upon this to a greater degree, but I'm just tying this in with what I understand and what I know in my own viewpoint. As you can see here, this is the Kabbalistic Simsum, and these are the 10 emanations or permutations that would later be congealed into that of the Sephirah in the Sephirotic tree. Ultimately, the way you control this is that you realize that you can't just go around the center, the outer rim of that, right? You have to, the only way to escape the circle is not to break forth from the circle. You can't. What you must do is you must basically ride the wave, circle the drain downwards, epoch after epoch, cycle after cycle. This is what this Andrew Chumbly quote is stating, right? Where you project yourself as the mortal god and goddess through the masks that you convey, right? The narratives and all of this, right? The faith, all of these ideas, all of the abstractionism that you convey to the society. And this allows you to basically be out with the society, out with the Heraclitean flux of that society, but basically controlling that Heraclitean flux. Again, it's a microcosm of the Heraclitean flux, which is war, strife, basically the characteristics of time and the ever-changing nature of reality. And thus, it allows you to sort of create an alchemical society, right? Where you can maintain people and control people and use their basically use their productivity through brainwashing to bring you ever closer to the center of that circle. The center of that circle is exactly the biodigital convergence. It's where they believe that they can conquer time and death, because you no longer have the body, the soul, or that of the Geist, right? So you don't have these three characteristics anymore, because they're all now they've all collapsed into that singularity. So this is what's really behind, in a geometric sense, this is what's behind the biodigital convergence. They want to conquer time and death. And what I'm saying is, this is what I think is destined for all civilizations in all grand civilizational ages. Atlantis being sort of a mythological cautionary tale to this. And the cautionary tale is, eventually the philosopher kings, they will no longer be wise elders that just simply control society to satiate their need for authority or power envy or whatever it may be. That they almost desire a total conquest of time and death itself. They no longer want to die. So the only way you can do that is to effectively you have to destroy the system as we know it, meaning you have to get rid of the human being as you know it and completely quantize all of it down, and hence the biodigital convergence. Sorry, that wasn't a summary, but I hope that made sense.
Yeah. On that, we came out with that term, this idea during the week. I think I communicated briefly with you around this the birth from the birth, the unnatural birth, or the birth, like, in Christianity, from the Virgin. But I think, is it parthenogenesis? Is that the term?
Parthenogenesis,
Parthenogenesis.
yeah.
So maybe like this concept of parthenogenesis, i.e., a species that can reproduce without the natural, how do you say it, intercourse between the male and female, that perhaps this idea, like you're saying, of conquering death and time, that one of the manifestations of this would be the capacity, maybe from the biodigital point of view, to create a species that can reproduce itself outside of the natural way of doing that it would synthetically reproduce, and that, like, when you say the death or maybe the destruction of humanity, you'd be eradicating human beings as they were, but coming up with some sort of a new form, like Ahriman, in this kind of a completely new way of being,
Mhm.
like a new epoch or something like that. Do you think something like that could make up
Um,
the future?
well, to answer
Yeah.
it really quickly, yeah, jump in, Noble, jump in.
Would you be kind enough to throw that animation back up, Silas? See if I can bridge the gap between Zeal's thoughts and uh, your share there, because as an astrologer, I'm looking at this circle with the dot in the center, and the light bulbs are going off as you guys are uh, going stream of consciousness here. For those of you who are not familiar with astrology, Western astrology, the 0 point, um, or is that an O? An O, or the 0 point in this particular case. When one casts the zodiac for a native, for a individual that's emerged into this incarnation through his or her mama's womb, that time of emergence is the is how we craft their personal natal chart. Now, it's not, as you can imagine, the center point is the native. So it's a geocentric model. So the microcosm in this particular case is at the center point. And without getting into the nuance and the details with regards to astrology, there is a technical term that we use, which you guys have probably heard about. At least if you've listened to me and Armin talk a little bit about this, is it's called a square. When you started talking about a right angle triangle, you got my attention. And then as I'm casting my gaze at the animation here, I can literally see the squares emerging the as the individual, the microcosm, the native or the human, goes through cyclical existence, right? There is what we call squares in astrology happen, and squares are right angles, basically right angle triangles, for lack of a better. And the squares, as opposed to, say, for example, a sextile, which is 60 degrees, or a trine, which is 120 degrees, are what we call the angles of sorrow. So a square is at a right angle, or if you think about it's perpendicular too, right? And so if you think about it in terms of energies, as energy is moving through space and time, for example, and it hits a right angle, it's got to make a hard right or left, for example, in order to continue forth, right? If you think about that in more of a, say, 120 degrees, that's going to be more open, and the energy or the angulation is going to be a smoother flow for that energy. So what am I getting at? Is squares are natural tensions that happen as we participate in life. And even though the tension or the squares bring conflict, they bring in discord, distortion. They're not pleasant, frankly. And those are the things that ultimately, those are the catalysts that brings us from one state of existence to the next. And in a perfect world, or at least in the world that I understand, is when we go through conflict or square or tension, we go through darkness or into the underworld, or as we go through what we call the dark nights of the soul, a bunch of different ways to saying the same thing. What happens is when we emerge out the other side, um, ultimately, we're supposed to be better for it. We're supposed to be born anew, right? Now, back to this idea of the cyclical nature of life as opposed to the spiral nature, right? And so if we keep hitting these square moments in our life, right, and we don't learn the lesson, so to speak, um, we don't walk through the door of wisdom in this particular case, like going through a difficult time. What happens is inevitably we run into the brick wall again and again and again. And many of us, and particularly those of us who are unconscious, we just don't learn. We just don't learn the lesson, and so we are bound by this cyclical nature, right? We don't ever go through the portal, up the stairs into the spiral up to the next octave. Is the way that I like to look at it. Like uh, Silas was speaking about spiraling down. Uh, Another way to think about it is spiraling up. And as a yogi, we often talk about the chakras, which are on a vertical axis. And we when we're in our density, when we're in tension or density or squares, for lack of a better, we tend to be lower in our energy systems as a human being, and lower in our chakras, are more of our animal. And then as we go to the process of life, as we get subjected to tension, to squares, right, we transcend those, hopefully, and then we can go up and we can move up, ultimately in consciousness, so that we can, at the end of this journey of what we call life, that we emerge out of better, wiser person than we did when we were born, right? I guess that's the idea. My sense is that those who are controlling or trying to control the portals, are trying to keep us in the circle, um, or as Silas, I think, pointed out, they're trying to condense it down into this singularity point where there isn't any room for quote unquote error, or anything that can't be objectively controlled, right? And so it makes sense that they would want to biodigitally converge us. And I beg a favor of you guys, and perhaps you've seen some of my posts, or you've listened to some stuff regarding Evolution Smith or some others that have been really pointing to many of the events that happen in the mundane world. These events that we are studying and that we're making videos on and whatnot, they are in accordance to astrological phenomena, right? And so after listening to both of you, and I'm starting to have a little bit better understanding of why um, those that are orchestrating these events, and they seem to be trying to, even though at one point we were on the Gregorian calendar and really subject to the 12-hour or the 24-hour clock, I really see them moving us towards more of what I would consider to be an astrological clock, or a real-time clock. Because again, as an astrologer, I can tell you that when the sun is square Pluto, the shit's going to hit the fan. There's going to be a world leader, the sun, is going to fall prey to Pluto, the underworld, and is going to be assassinated, or fake assassinated, or suicided, or something to this effect. And so it's really I mean, it's clockwork. Literally, it's clockwork. And so it stands to reason, as those in power are trying to rein us in. They want to rein everything in and rein it down into um, predictability, because what they can't, at least they haven't been able to predict, Zeal, I would argue, as a uh, you know, like my personal philosophy is that we have free will choice. We have agency as a human being, and they cannot predict how you are going to respond to the square. You know, when you're faced with adversity, right? They can glean how you're going to respond based on perhaps some of your previous actions, but you're a wild card, brother. You know, you may 99 out of 100 times you may do the same thing, but it's that one time where you're going to do something different because you're tired of doing the same thing over and over and again. And I think they want to eliminate that 1%. And so anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
No, that's really spot on. That's well the last point that you brought up, that is exactly their thinking behind this. Because it's that 1% or that 0.1%, that point, you know, 0.000, you know, to infinity 1% that has the potential when you start to when these cycles are seen within a longer term, you know, in a boundless scope, eventually it will cause issue, it will cause problem, right? So you won't have a perfectly hermetically sealed system, and this is the issue. That's a really profound point, very significant point right at the end. Absolutely. Do you want to make comment, Zeal?
No, just I echo that. Like that concept of our capacity for variance, like that they want to eliminate that. That ties in with individuality and all those things. So yeah,
Yeah.
they want to normalize this.
Wanted to bring something to your attention regarding this point. It sounds like Zeal, maybe we caught you with a sandwich or something there. It's like this goes again. This is putting back the esoteric spiritual hat, but it's relevant to what we're talking about. So there's an for anybody who's practiced any number of the different flavors of Buddhism. You may be familiar with the idea of the four thoughts that turn the mind, and it's part of the common nundro that are generally associated with most of these different flavors of Buddhism. It's a consistent piece across them. Um, there's what we call uncommon nundros, or things that are specific to maybe a specific lineage or whatnot. At any rate, I wanted to read a couple of these to you because anybody who's practiced Buddhism for a while, they're asked to contemplate upon these thoughts. And they're both relevant I think, to what we've been talking about. So this one is the third thought that turns the mind. Um, Oh, no, wait a second here. Yeah. It is not certain when death and impermanence will strike. Life is like a bubble. So release any clinging to permanence. Doing that, continue to make effort until you capture the deathless nature, the stronghold of primordial wisdom. And the last one I wanted to share with you is more germane to the specifically what we were just talking about, but it's seeing the nature of suffering of cyclical existence as being like a pit of fire. Become wary, give birth to renunciation, and strive for liberation from this prison. Now, when I first read that, I mean, that was that smacked me right up beside the head. And because that certainly jives with my understanding of kind of some new age thinking, with this idea that we want to transcend this place because this place is wrought with suffering, right? But when you start getting into tantric ways of thought, Buddhist or Indian tantric ways of thought, and then they more or less celebrate this human birth, right? And it's important, and it's an opportunity for us to um, experience life and all of these things. So when I read this, they're speaking of the cyclical nature, which is what we were just talking about, as being like a pit of fire. In other words, at some point we grow wary of this, and we want to strive for liberation from this prison. Um, wow, right? So how do we strive for liberation from this prison? Well, I think we spiral up. And how do we spiral up? Well, the Buddhists will give you a bunch of practices that you can tackle in order to understand who you are, where you are, and why you are, and a little bit more with more clarity, so that you can venture on to the next level, so to speak, of the game called human existence and life and whatnot. But somehow I thought that was relevant. I just happened to have this in my backpack, and I thought I'd share that piece.
Well, see,
Yeah.
what they desire is the exact opposite. They want the spiraling downwards. But that's a really profound thing that you mentioned. Sorry, I interjected, man.
No, I was finished, so I'm glad you did. Thank you.
No, that's a really great and really germane thing that you shared there, and it's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, there's this little sort of geometric view of it here, and this is basically the inversion of what you mentioned, Noble, and they're doing it through abstractionism. They don't want the warmth and the love and the light per se, in so much as they can artificially establish these things, but they effectively want the coldness of it all, you know, and they know people are going to grow wary of the cycles, right? So this biodigital system is almost preempting that itself, because what you're doing through the Geist, and the Geist producing a sort of I've called it here a technocratic gravity, or a technological gravity, right? You're pulling it down to the center, to the lacuna, which is the negative space. And see that this is the problem is, ultimately, is once they get to this lacuna, this 0 point, this omega point, basically that's the end of history, or quote unquote. But the lacuna is required, because once they get to that point, the thing just starts over again and again and again. So you see, they don't. It's like they don't want to transcend the cycle. They just want to ride the wave downwards, spiraling downwards until they hit the lacuna. That basically is the destruction that establishes the negative space, which is the necessary prerequisite for growth, because you create the space for new things to be born and to grow and so on and so forth. And that's how these systems eventually end, you know. But the system ending isn't necessarily the end of the world. I want to stress that. When this thing ends, it won't be the end of the world. It will be the resuming of another cycle. And we'll have another chance, like we were saying, Noble, of perhaps transcending it the right way. You know? Perhaps there is a transcendence, but the way they view it is a completely, it's like it's a closed system. There is no transcendence. And even the way they view astrology and astronomy and things like that, and I'll just make this final point, and then we'll have the closing points from you guys, which is that I think they view, for example, what you're seeing here, right? So it's going around the circle. Think of this as the nomadic time period. Humanity hasn't got any sort of technological distortion yet, right, in its system. It's not entered civilization yet into that model. And of course, you know, as soon as this happens, you've initiated the technological gravitational pull down to the lacuna, and civilization will just peter out, and then you will have a reset, right? A really great reset. It's back to the beginning. But as you notice here, so I think almost the way they view astronomy and the cycles of astronomy and the zodiacal wheel, and even the way they discuss us, at least in a metaphorical sense, they call us the sailors of stars. This is why the astronaut thing and the astronaut suit is always used. The astronaut suit is the Lieb, which is the body which contains the Zeal, which is being sort of, you know, dictated between the dialectic of the Lieb and that of the Geist, or the materiality, as you see with C. So where they converge, that is the Zeal or the synthesis. That's what establishes love, eros, the energy that moves things, the lush. And as technological, before I go into that, basically the zodiacal wheel, I think they believe that where we are now, I think they think we have spiraled downwards from the heavens. So that's where I believe they're taking this trajectory from, right? It's so in that sense, I think they believe we're almost at the end of history anyway, being human beings. You know, so I think they've got that mindset, you know, that this is the only way, this is the only trajectory, as opposed to, say, a more positive or constructive viewpoint, which would be, well, perhaps we can transcend this, or perhaps we just should love life and love our family and strive to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, and strive to be organic. And as you can see here, with the Zeal gets pulled further and further down into that negative space, because basically the entire idea of this system, this of civilization itself, is to destroy the soul, or to bury the soul. You can never really destroy the soul, but to bury the soul. But they don't realize the soul is like the spark. As soon as you bring it into that lacuna space, it's almost like igniting the dynamite. You know what I mean? And it just, it just blows up the system anyway. Because like what I'm saying, as soon as you get rid of the soul, the body and even the Geist can't function properly. There's no underlying reality from a human vantage point. So, I don't know how they're going to get by that. Are we going to become totally one with the machine? Who knows? But so anyway, I'll let you guys. I'm going to have to head off. But I'll let you guys close out with some your final points and remarks and thoughts upon what we've covered thus far. I do apologize. I did take this down on a bit of a tangent, so I do apologize there.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen where they're going to go with the biodigital stuff, and whether we're going to be like how far in we are into it is a question on itself. Like, are we, as they say, has this been going on since the 90s, or is this new technology? And it seems that it would explain a lot of their confidence, their apparent confidence and hubris overall. The wider cycles, I think you both have spoken about in depth. So, it kind of puts everything in a kind of strange perspective. So it remains to be seen how things will turn out.
Do you feel it an emancipating perspective? What's your opinions upon that?
It's a good question. It's a good question. Sometimes I'm not so sure. Sometimes I think it is, because you're pursuing the truth ultimately, but that truth can be like a bitter pill to swallow at the same time. So it's like to say, where ignorance is bliss, it's folly to be wise. So we're at a time where we're seeking a bit of wisdom and knowledge and truth, and some of the doors we're opening are less than savory, maybe, but like, as painful or as it may be on whatever level, I think it's still ultimately you're better off to know the truth of things, like, because I think it's ultimately liberating. But it comes at, it's a kind of a, it's not like discovering the lottery numbers,
No,
It's
not
like,
quite.
you know what I mean? It's like,
I wish it
it has
was.
yeah, well, maybe it is in a kind of spiritual sense, like, our higher spiritual forms are, in a good karmic state, because I think we're doing our best to try and elucidate what's happening, like, but I do find things to be, that sense of atomization, that kind of strangeness that strange feeling around. I don't know if I think you've mentioned it once or twice, Silas, that you felt that way as well. So maybe that's a symptom of the discovery is that you kind of enter into, you start to see the synthetic layers around you, like, and even consciousness, even the social consciousness, like the normal way that people are in society, and you kind of begin to see it, the way people are is that they're kind of, there's edifices and layers of inculcation and propaganda and deception, manipulation over thousands of years built up in us all. But like when you start to peel away your own layers, know thyself, you see the people around you in a slightly different light, because you can see
Hmm.
sometimes that they're still in a certain position, and you kind of have to allow for that and be patient with that and kind of not judge and kind of somehow box that away, but at times it's a little bit disorientating, I think, because in an ideal world you'd have a healthy society around you, and you'd reverberate in that healthy society, and you'd bounce off it, and it would fulfill you, and it would energize you, and it would be healthy for you. Whereas in this society, there's a lot that's not at what we might call a kind of an optimum reverberation. So we have to contend with the outcome of that, like on a kind of a subconscious level or consciously on a day-to-day basis, like so. And it affects how we interact, but it also sort of affects our own self-view, our view of our individual selves, because some of our self is constructed from our relationships with the people we have around us, be it family, work colleagues, and the like, society. So you get into this, you know what I mean? There's a complexity there, like, So to answer your question, sometimes I wonder, are we better off not to know? But as I said, this deep down, ultimately, in the truth of truths of the inner self and the higher self, I think it's the way of to know is the way, really, to know, to see things as they are. And that, but who was to say that path ever would be easy? That spiritual path. Who was to ever say that that was an easy path? Like, look at the Logos himself carrying the cross. Like, that was his part of his spiritual path. There was a kind of a persecution in it. Like, so, to cast away all those, as you said, the masks, to remove them is there's a kind of a pain in that. There's a burning in that. There's a kind of a putrefaction in that, like a kind of a nigredo, a reduction, and that process. There's a kind of a pain in that, like, but ultimately, I think in the longer, you mentioned these things like death and time, like over time, over the Saturnian energy of extended time, it's that from that viewpoint, I think we need to kind of remember things and look at things and say, well, maybe today in this exact moment, it's it's not ideal, like, but if we looked at it in the greater schema of our lives, and perhaps our afterlives or our next lives, or whatever way you may, your the Buddhism was mentioned, but whatever your belief spectrum is, that in that line we're on a good path. But that's not to say we won't have our burdens to carry as we open these doors, like, and open these cans of worms. They bring their own sort of things that have to be contended with. But the thing that I always come back to and finish on this point is this idea of the cycle or the wheel. So if you find things get dark or concerning or fearful, for me, I would try to remember that these things are on a big wheel anyway. Irrespective, there's a big wheel that turns, and these forces balance each other out, or they make things might collapse on top of each other and regrow and all this kind of thing. So it's ultimately these are kind of forces sort of balance each other out. So what is actually the point in fear or any type of concerns, really? Because we're but a drop in the ocean in this story, like, in the bigger picture of things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, fear is only fear should be a very short term. It's sort of like a boot up the arse, if you will, right? And it just brings you into that survival mindset. But ultimately, it only should affect you within your immediate um, environment. So we shouldn't look at these things and be fearful. In so much as this, it allows us to detect threats. So we should feel something, but it shouldn't necessarily be, a paralyzing fear, or of course, even beyond that, a paralyzing apathy. There is light at the end of this tunnel. These people, for all their power and wealth and the techniques to stupefy the masses that are at their disposal, they fundamentally lack any quality that could make them gods. They're not gods. They're flesh and blood. They bleed red. They shit and piss like everyone else, right? They are as as they're as rooted in the earth as anyone else, even though they've tried to get away from the earth by living in their ivory towers. And of course, you could say the same thing about many people that have latched on to certain abstractions and ideologies throughout society, all societies. All of all of all that to say, these people will lose in the end. Will it be catastrophic? Probably, but it will be a catalyst for new growth, for a spring to form once more. So absolutely, yeah. Noble, please.
Yeah, I always enjoy speaking with you guys. We covered all the bases today. So thank you for your time. And um, you know, the it's my 24-year-old daughter is um, looked me right in the eyes after one of these long conversations about the nature of reality and what's going on in the world. She looks me dead square in the eyes and she said, "Dad, okay, so what do you want me to do with this information?" So no, it's like, and she's just like, "Hey man, okay, now that we've uncovered some of these things, what are we to make of it? How is this going to inform our malicious and conscious action?" And I mean, when we speak on these topics, um, when we're trying to brush up against truth, even though sometimes the truth can, well, not only, as Carlos Castaneda says, not only can it set us free, but it could also be devastating, right? At least at first, and hit that jolt of fear. Okay, so when the dust settles and we center ground and balance, what are we going to do with this? And I've been really thinking about this a lot, and I, um, as an astrologer, it helps, and I'll get to that in just a moment here. But I really believe that human beings are precious, and that we have agency to our experience far greater than most of us really understand. And of course, that's been obscured and occulted from us. At least that's that's my reckoning. That's how I reckon it. And you don't, pardon me for saying it, but you don't teach the slave how to read, right? Or you do so gingerly. And anyway, I think we have immense agency. And so what I'm trying to do is just take radical responsibility for my experience, really, really trying to stay out of victimhood. It's really easy to become victimized, in particular with all this insanity that we're seeing around us and the shenanigans and whatnot. And if somehow, some way, I can take some ownership in the experience, then I can retain my power, and then I can craft and create an experience, maybe in my sphere of influence, in my little place in the world. Um, that's a little bit different than what we're seeing on the Black Mirror. That we're seeing on the screen. I'm down here in Mexico, and right now, anyway, there isn't World War III. It's not lost on me that that battles on different places of the earth are going to impact every square inch of it. But there isn't a kinetic war right now where I'm at, and so I need to be present. I need to be present right here, right now. The last thing I wanted to share is as an astrologer, paying attention to the transits, not only the transits of past, but and what's going on right now, but the transits in the near future. Um, they're special, guys. The outer planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, take a long time to circle the sun. They move in long cycles, 250 for Pluto, 165 for Neptune, 84 years for Uranus, etc. Well, in mid-July, um, these transpersonal planets, what they're called, are in very beautiful and harmonious aspects with one another. They're at 4 degrees in in their respective signs, which means they're making exact sextiles and exact trines. And for those of you that don't know what the hell that means, it just means it's harmonious. It's a harmonious aspect, and actually Jupiter's involved as well. On July 19th, for example, it's like these transpersonal planets are in the most harmonious aspect that they've been in centuries, basically, right? And so, look, I don't think it's an accident that there's just been this
Mhm.
onslaught of bullshit to bring fear into the psyches of man. Why? Is because I think that they want us to build a life and an experience to their making instead of our own, right? And as we retain our agency and we recognize that we have some say in our experience, well, then we can defy these motherfuckers. We can craft a different experience. And it's not a surprise that on July 19th is the World Cup final. Arguably one, if not the most viewed, um, bread and circus game of what every 4 years, right? And so this when this exactitude of which I just mentioned regarding these transpersonal planets line up on July 19th, the same day as the World Cup final. So I would suspect that we're going to see some shenanigans here. But if we can remember that we are that we have agency and whatnot, then we can operate despite their influence, or at least to the extent to which that's possible. So I appreciate you guys more than you know, and yeah, thank you. Thank
No,
you for your
absolutely.
thoughts.
Thank you. And I totally concur with what you're saying. Ultimately, with all of this, if we can
Thanks, Noble.
perhaps, yeah, absolutely, man. Well, guys, that was great, and we're gonna have to actually do this again because I went on a bit of a tangent, and I was looking to get more into the technical details. You have a lot of great understanding about this, Zeal,
I
and
do and I don't. My own
mm,
input tonight's been a bit patchy. I feel I'm not in my normal kind of tuned in state or something. It's lately. I don't know if it's a summary of all the stuff that's going on around us or whether it's
I think you need
me
a holiday
personally.
to Mexico, mate. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
need some tequila and
Actually, I'm herself. I've convinced herself to try and get us a holiday in La Palma in the
Oh, La
Canaries.
Palma. Yes, yes, yes,
An interesting spot.
yes. Well, the hantavirus and all of that's there, so you can be our eyes on the ground.
Yeah, Jesus. Is it in La Palma?
Well, no, it's Tenerife. They say, but
Oh,
yeah.
I don't. Do you remember your man on YouTube, Silas? Oh man, he did a whole thing on it. He was, oh, can't remember the guy's name now. What his handle was, but he had a whole kind of occult thing on La Palma, and you shake it, then you spear it, and the palm, and stuff.
No, I don't recall that. I but I do recall the whole. It was part of that whole narrative regarding the super volcano or super
Yes.
earth. Yeah, some seismic thing.
Yeah, yeah,
That was
yeah.
2022, I do believe. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's another term for the palm or the palm tree is the lulav in Hebrew, and that's very important in
What does it
certain.
mean?
Lulav literally means the palm tree, but it relates to the palm itself, and this is where you get the occult symbolism of the alchemist's hand, and ultimately it's this idea of what I just showed you there, which is the cycles of death and destruction itself, and the sort of frenzied joy of it all, and and the cyclicality of it all, of course, as well. So this is what it ties into there, but it could have been a nod with that. The lulav as well within Kabbalah and general Judaism is utilized. I forget what festival now, but basically they sort of tout it. They have it emblazoned on this stick, right? And they go around the congregation of a synagogue, for example, and what it implies is the eventual, basically the eventual promise that was provided to them of this sort of well, in Kabbalah it's the Tikkun Olam and the onset of the Messiah, the Mashiach, or just in terms of Judaism, just the Mashiach itself, right? And so, this is what it basically implies. Once you get past the Mashiach in the 6th century, basically you get to this same idea that the heaven and the earth is remade anew, because like what I showed you in that infographic, it reaches the lacuna or the omega point. So human history, according to Kabbalah, occurs within 7 steps or 7 days of 7,000 years. And this is, so the idea is that God deconstructed himself in 7 days, and thus we must do the reverse to get back to the Simsum or the Ein, the nothingness. And we must do that in 7 days or 7,000 years. It's all pretty mad when you look at it, but ultimately this is the sort of binding philosophy that surrounds this all. Yeah. So that's what it ultimately relates to. But that'd be interesting if you were there. You could get some really good photographs. There's some cracking runes there. Runes, ruins, not runes. But yeah, man.
Okay.
Right,
Okay,
gents. Have a good
Peace
one,
and
guys.
love. Peace and love, fellas. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, Noble. Great to talk to you.